This week, Chris Brenton from Active Countermeasures joins us, which is going to be a lot of fun, so make sure you stay tuned for that, as well as the enterprise security news, which was kind of interesting. Their Riverbed Managed Engine, 2FIN were announcements, and maybe even NetScout were really about network performance monitoring, not so much security, but I think that was due to a conference that was held this week by Cisco. In other news, Synopsys, as well as Keyscaler, A10, and Splunk makes an acquisition. All that and more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
I'm a tiger. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know how this is going to go because Paul's not here this week, but we're just going to give it a shot.
Even if you've got experience in security, you can benefit from going to somewhere and learning about that bug again. Wearing my tactical turtleneck just for Mr. John Strand, who is on the lines via Skype. John, welcome to the program.
I'm wearing the tactical fleece as well, Paul. This is excellent. A fully, completely, and utterly tactical show.
Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs InCommand SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. InCommand SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/security weekly and request to see InCommand SOAR live in action. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/security weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome everyone to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is episode 95 for Wednesday, June 13th, 2018. I'm of course your host, Paul Asadorian, broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. On the lines via Skype is Mr. John Strand, that looks like he's in somewhere in South Dakota with a black curtain in the background.
Exactly. I'm in the studio without any of the lights on. I just basically jumped in here very, very, very quickly and got set up.
Is that because the hamster that runs on the wheel to keep the power going got tired?
No. The pigs and the cows that actually generate the waste that we power our generators from, Thunderdome style, have escaped. But we'll get them back shortly.
Oh, I just envisioning BHIS employees running around chasing cattle.
It's not far off from that at all.
So I'm excited for this episode. This is a really unique opportunity. It's kind of a little incestuous, I would suppose, I think. So as our listeners know, John Strand and I created what we had first called Offensive Countermeasures. Now we're calling Active Countermeasures. to bring a product in the market that actually solve problems for people. Along that way, I remember this conversation vividly. John's like, Paul, you and I are kind of busy. We need to bring someone in to help us. I'm like, yes. He's like, well, I was thinking of Chris Brenton. I was like, yes. He's like, and he'd be really awesome. I'm like, dude, you don't have to. I'm like, just yes. They're like, yes, that is awesome. So, John, I don't know if you want to introduce Chris from your perspective as well.
Absolutely. Chris came into Active Countermeasures, I want to say about a year ago, and now basically is a partner with Paul and I. And we've gotten him to that point. Actually, he got himself to that point because we found out that we suck at a lot of this, mainly the time management aspect and basically anything to do with managing a development team. We kind of sucked at that too. So he stepped in and really made this work. And more importantly, it's kind of fun to see Chris work with the developers because I believe a lot of the developers assumed mistakenly that Chris was just like a manager. And then they start trying to talk technical and try to go over his head. And that just doesn't go well for the developers at all. So no, the technical chops, the capability, and the understanding of the problem space is huge. So with that, Chris, I'll hand it over to you, sir.
Wow, that's like quite the intro.
And Chris, and
you scare our developers. Was that the intro? That's the part that was interesting.
Yeah. And what I love about working with Chris too is, Chris, when you say stuff, I'm like, yeah, like that's yes, do that. Like a lot of the things you say, I'm like, the stuff that we've talked about on the show, it's stuff that we've recommended how people run, their operation, position themselves in the market. So it's wonderful to have you on board and leading the charge at Active Countermeasures. So
yeah, it's kind of funny to hear your side because from my perspective, it was John saying, "Hey, I think I got this tool that I think is kind of cool. I want you to check it out." I saw it and was like, oh my God, I have to be involved. And he's like, well, we're just startup. I don't care. I have to be involved. Well, we got this going on. I don't care. I'm going to be involved. I'm going to start working on this, whether you want me to or John, want me to or not, John, get used to it.
Yep. That's awesome. I love how it's come full circle. Chris was, one of my SANS instructors back in the day as well. I actually own a copy of your Mastering Cisco Routers book. So it's really, really super cool.
I think it's actually on one of the shelves in the studio, actually.
Is it? Yeah.
Last I was in there, I thought I saw it.
Yeah, it's either here or at home. I'm still working on bringing some of my books from home into the studio. So, Chris, let's focus a little on Active Countermeasures and the product. As some are probably wondering, like, hey, well, like, what did you guys build? So let's start with what problem we're trying to solve with Active Countermeasures.
Make this really easy. We got a tool called AI Hunter that analyzes network traffic and identifies which internal systems that have been compromised. It's really that simple.
Yeah, and so the analogy that you recently dropped on me that I'm still giddy with excitement about, and I'm totally crediting you because I'm probably going to use it in a webcast tomorrow because it's just so applicable in the way that it describes how we need to think of solutions in the enterprise today that help us with security. So, Chris, do you want to explain for our listeners, I think it's a great starting point, that 1 to 100 scale that you described yesterday to me?
Yeah, so this is something that John and I have kind of tossed around. When you look at threat hunting in general, it's really hard. And it's hard because, to kind of be a pain right now, I'm going to say a lot of the tools out there really stink. They're great at collecting up tons and tons and tons of information, and then you quickly go into overload to try and figure out, okay, what actually means something and what doesn't. So if you look at it from a scale of 1 to 100, and think about if something scores a 1, that's something you can look at and you can say, oh yeah, that's normal, that's safe, I totally understand that. That one is particularly fine, I don't need to worry about it. To 100, which is, oh no, I think I just left a spot in the bottom of my chair and I may have to go on a LinkedIn and find another job because we just got whacked in big time. So, that's our scale. And both of those situations, to some extent, are easy, meaning that if you can just quickly look at it and figure out, oh yeah, that's bad, or oh yeah, that's good, your job at that point is done. You get to move on to the next session you need to analyze. The problem is that gray area in the middle, right? So this is where you need, smart people like Strand doing this stuff, because John may work from 0 to 40 And then from, let's say 60 to 100 is his range of understanding. So anything that falls in there, he gets it, he knows it, he can dismiss it and move on to the next item. It's the 40 to 60 that he needs to spend time on saying, I've never seen that before. It might be bad, it might be good, I'm not sure. So what we've done with the tool is to try and come up with a set of tools and come up with a process that makes that area as small as possible for anybody who's using the tool. I talked about John, but when you look at this in like a corporate environment, typically what happens is you've got a director or a manager or whatever of security. You've got one, if you're lucky, you have two guru people on the team. And then the range of analysts below that tend to be, everything from mid-level to junior. So when you look at who's going to actually have to do that first pass at threat hunting within an organization, it's the junior analysts. They're the only ones who have the time. So if I'm giving
Chris,
you
they might not even be in security. This situation is
exactly.
very close to where it was in the university, right? A couple security engineers and the network engineers, I'd have to give them stuff, right?
Yeah. Dude, we just signed on a customer. He is the only security person for a government, which frightens me. But his only resource is the IT team. And he bought the product because, hey, this is something I can actually give the IT team to go in and do threat hunting. And if they get stuck, they can call me in to help them out.
Well, and that whole concept was a bit of a detour. Chris, you remember when we were first working on threat hunting with people and we were going through these, we started having people say, yeah, this was really easy. I was able to have my junior analysts start doing the analysis and actually finding some really interesting things. And that wasn't quite what we set out to do. I mean, honestly, we set out to create a really cool product for tech geeks to make their life easier. And it turns out that it actually made it a lot easier for people that may not know Bro. They may not know TCP dump filters. They may not know a lot of these different tools that we use all the time in depth. But the way that you visualize it, you filter it out and you bring things to their attention. And then you give them the information to make good decisions, really streamline the entire process for their workflow. And that was just kind of a weird bonus that came out of this whole entire thing that's been great since then.
So it wasn't a weird bonus for me. That was actually the target from the beginning. Yeah. And if you go back to like at the marketing strategy I wrote up for you guys back in like October, that was exactly what I pegged was, we got to get this working for junior analysts. And, that's why we've got that scoring system. So when you launch the tool, the first thing you go in and analyze is anything on my network beaconing? And there's a percentage score there. There's a number, let's say the very top one at the list, we may be saying we're 99.98% positive that this system is beaconing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's evil. We've got whitelisting, we've got blacklisting you can fall on to kind of discern what is the intent of this beacon activity. But when you look at what goes on the internet today, good 60% of beaconing type activity is evil. So if you found that, more than likely, this is going to be something that's going to make your day very busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I worked for the university, I lived this, right? And, every day I would get in, look at my logs, I'd look at my net flow traffic, I'd look at maybe some packet captures from my intrusion detection system. And, I had developed scripts that, that first 20, 30 points on that scale, I had scripts that would basically just remove that data because I knew I didn't care about that, right? And then you take that 80 to 100, I had scripts that pluck that out and went automatically off and file tickets, right? Because I'm like, that stuff's definitely bad. There's basically a where server listening on this, port on this system that, is in the dorms or whatever. And I would spend the rest of my day looking at everything in between. And so my question, Chris, is how do we help analysts with that in between today? What are some of the other factors and techniques in the product that make it so you don't have to spend a whole day on that in between, that you can go on and move to other projects?
Hey, that script sounds pretty cool. That's something I should have had as a lab in the 502 SANS class. Oh, wait, yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the way to go about doing it. And like we're talking about, you come down to that gray area. So a couple of things we have going. One is we feed off of, I think it's 3 blacklist different services by default. So if you've got an internal system that's beaconing to a blacklist, that makes it pretty damn straightforward. We're in the process of rolling out default whitelist for people. So the concept is if you've got an Ubuntu system and, that's, beaconing out, but it's just trying to get patches, Yeah, okay, that's something you don't have to worry about, so we can filter that stuff out for you. So we've got a couple of tools that immediately kind of cut the wheat from the chaff. We've also added in some really cool informational capability to this. And this was a John Strand brainstorm, which I think has been absolutely awesome. So if you imagine you see something suspicious is taking place, you've got an internal system talking to a host on the internet. Say, okay, what is that IP address out on the internet? Let me go in and look it up. And if it's, some IP address .ec2.aws, good luck figuring out what it is. In other words, if you go in and you do a PTR record lookup on the thing, it isn't going to tell you a whole lot about that host itself. One of the things we've integrated into the tool is we actually look at the DNS A records and Quad A records that are taking place. So we look to see that internal host, what host name did it look up to get that IP address that caused it to go to that IP. So instead of seeing IP address.aws, you might see, it's never this easy, right? But evil CNC server dot evil bad guy .ru or something like that. That's information that after the fact, when you get into the network forensics, is really hard to pull out because the only thing you really have at hand is that PTR record. So we've added in some capabilities that really let you drill down on what's going on.
And whenever we were working with the developers, we made it very, very, very clear that we don't necessarily care what that name resolves to now or what that IP address resolves to now. We want to know what it resolved to whenever that request was made in the first place. That was the most important thing. And that's what brought us a lot more clarity.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because a lot of solutions on the market will give you that historical record, be able to do the PTR record, and give you some other data. But what really matters is what was the lookup right before I made or a system made the connection out to the internet. I think that's great.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about the deployment details. I know the three of us have had a lot of conversations about how it's deployed, installed, and consumed and lives, inside your network, outside your network. What's the strategy today?
So when I look at our product versus the couple that are left in the market today, two of the biggest differentiators I see, one is the simplicity of doing the threat hunt, but the other, quite honestly, is the install and just how easy it is. It's an on-prem solution. It's software-based. It runs on two systems. So we have one box that runs Bro and Rita, and we help to maintain, we spearheaded and now continue to help maintain Rita, which is an open source project which anybody can use to threat hunt their network. It's mostly command line based, so it's a little bit cumbersome to go through and use, but hey, it's a free threat hunting tool. It's hard to complain. But we use Bro to collect all the information off of the network. Typically we say network tab, spam port, pick your poison, the internal interface of the firewall. So we want to be able to see all traffic going in and out of the internet. Plug in Bro and Reader at that point to collect traffic. We collect a day's worth of traffic. We do some processing with it on that system, pass it off to a second system that's running the AI Hunter front end. That does some additional processing, and that's the front end that people go through and use to be able to on the network. So today it's Bro and Rita. We have a project that is, I'm going to say, not too far in the distant future, that's going to incorporate NetFlow and IPFix data as well. The nice thing about that is now you don't need to install Bro. You don't need to install Rita. You can, go to your switch, go to your router, whatever you want, point it at a particular host to send those IPFix log entries to, and we'll go through and we'll do our analysis on that. What we're finding is you don't get the same level of fidelity. So, for example, that DNS stuff that we were talking about, we can do that because, Bro is so good at what it does. IPFix isn't quite there yet. So you can get about 60 to 70% of the functionality out of it, but it also means that you don't need to buy another box. You don't need to plug it into a span port. You need to make a configuration change in an existing piece of hardware, and then you're up and ready to go.
So you must have had some pretty serious dirt on John to bring him over to the concept of using NetFlow data.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I'll tell the story. It's my embarrassment.
More like a slow
so, Chris, what was like one of the first things you said to me when you first came on?
Same thing. Same thing.
It was something like you really need to be working with NetFlow data.
I think it's the same thing that I said when I first came on as well.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference between NetFlow, IPFix, and like connection logs that you would get off of a firewall. And whenever you're looking at just the logs of a firewall, you don't get the level of fidelity and consistency in enough fidelity to actually do beaconing properly. And that's what we actually ran into, because most of the time, whenever we were working with customers, this is years ago, doing services as a hunt team, we were stuck with logs, and the logs were hideous. And in my head, I kind of conflated the idea of NetFlow and logs together, and that was an incorrect assumption on my part, and I was dumb. And as we started doing more research into it, or more accurately, I started doing more research into it because Chris and Bill Stearns knew, we found out that there was a lot more consistency in NetFlow and IPFix. IPFix looks to be a lot more consistent and better as far as its documentation and its consistency. But that NetFlow and that IPFix, as Chris said, it'll get us about 75% of the way there. It'll get us the really hard things like the beaconing data, and then we can do a lot of intel on the back end. And we're coming up with some cool tricks as well for actually getting DNS resolution as well. But that's kind of an evolution, because a lot of the vendors in this place, they got stuck because most customers don't want to install yet another device on a span port, on an egress switch. They just don't, or on a firewall. They just don't. And the ability to ingest that data and work through it makes it a lot more of an approachable product, because you just basically stand up a box, configure your firewall, your router, your switch to shove its NetFlow IPFix data over to that box, and then magic happens on the back end. So that's really the next step of where this tool is going. And right now we've got Logan working on it. We've got Bill Stearns working on it. And I think we have a couple of other people. I think Ben's working on it as well. So we should be rolling that out, I would say, within the next couple of months.
And now
Stearns is the fixer. When I came in, the install good, I want to say 10, 12 hours, and you need a development background. And Stearns has that down to, it's about a 15-minute process to install, and you can run it from any system on your environment.
Yep.
Now we're mixing the terms of IPFix and NetFlow. So let's say I have this scenario. I've got a Cisco network, right? I've got routers and I guess routers, right? I mean, switches can do routing, but let's just say I've got Cisco routers in my infrastructure, and I want to pull the NetFlow data off of them. Is that compatible with IPFix? Like, how do I do that?
Depends on the version of NetFlow that you're using. If you're running the latest and greatest, yes, that is compliant with the IP. So basically, NetFlow came first. Cisco was the first one to do this. They kind of set the specification, and then the internet did what the internet always does is they said, wow, that proprietary solution is very cool. Let's come up with an open source version of that everybody can use. That's where IPFix came from. Over time, Cisco kind of pulled themselves back in line to be compatible. Let's say 5 years old, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. I'm
sorry, what was that last part, Chris? You were kind of breaking up there at the end.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, if so long as you're running hardware that the operating system's no more than like 5 years old, you're in pretty good shape.
Okay. That's awesome. So you described the typical deployment as being approximately 15 minutes. Of course, that means getting permission or somehow getting the packet mirror to come to the system that's going to collect it. What are some suggestions to make that easier for people?
Offer something in trade. So, there's a couple of ways this can go down. My last gig, I ran the security team, the operations team, and the IT team. So it was very easy for me to say to one team, you will do this for that other team. In a lot of environments, that's not the case. You don't have a single point you can go to. Getting them to understand that IPFix data can be used for more than just threat hunting. It can also be used for performance checking, that type of thing. So go in and kind of play it that way. If that isn't a possibility, you can still kind of work the trade angle. You can go in and you can maybe offer metrics that would be useful to the team that's actually going to set up the span port. You could go in and you could offer them training on the security side, because maybe they're getting a little bit bored with what they're doing and they want to start moving into other career possibilities. Never underestimate your ability to get things done by kind of working a deal.
When do you think the organization's ready for this type of solution? Are there other things that need to be in place in order to take advantage of it?
So I think most organizations are starting to wake on this. We went through a long period of time where we said, okay, I have a firewall, I have an IDS, I have antivirus, I have protections in place. And, therefore and we're just kind of figuring out, well, wait a minute, we've created this secure building, if you will, and then put nothing inside the building to figure out if anything, if all of our security catches have actually failed. And effectively, that's what threat hunting is. Threat hunting is what comes into play when everything falls apart. Folks are starting to realize that it's not a matter of if you'll get whacked, it's when and how often. 451 Group just did their 2018 threat study. And I found the numbers kind of telling. They polled, I think it was around 2,500, 3,000 different organizations. And 71% of them reported and said, we've been broken into at least once. And of course, my first thought was, okay, so does that mean that 29% is clean? Or that 29%, because it takes us about 6 months to figure out we've been broken into in the first place, are they still in that 6-month window and it's actually closer to 100% than that 71%? So once organizations kind of cross that threshold to realize they can't just defend, they need to actively make sure security posture is working the way they expect it to, that's when it's time to start moving into this.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a harsh, I was going to also add on, that's kind of a harsh realization. I still think that there's a lot of organizations that believe that if they keep their signatures up to date, they keep patched, if they get the threat intelligence feeds for what different threat actors are doing right now, and I'm not going to go on that rant right now, that they're going to be secure, right? And I don't think that when you're at that point and then all of a sudden you come to that realization that, holy crap, we just hired a pen test team, we're doing all of these things right, and they were able to bypass all of our security technologies, what's next? I think that there's a lot more organizations that are being brought up to that precipice and realizing that there has to be more, that it isn't just an issue of aligning all these technologies and getting them working properly, that you're going to be able to fend off an advanced adversary. And that's kind of where we're at. We're at that point waiting for organizations whenever they say, okay, we've been doing all this stuff right. Why are we still able to be compromised? Why are companies like Black Hills Information Security and Trusted Sec and Guardians and Rendition able to still get connectivity outside of their environment? And more importantly, how can I go about detecting that?
There are sorry, Chris, did you want to respond to that first?
Oh, yeah. So I just wanted to kind of right turn just a little bit on that, because I think a lot of the onus for that is on us, meaning that we kind of scream, oh my God, we're insecure, we need to fix it. And we talk in security speak, we don't talk in operation speak, we don't talk in risk speak. So what I mean by that is if your organization has a risk officer, start hanging around with them. If they have a legal team, start hanging around with them. Not only get to know them as people, but get to know their lingo and get to look at how they analyze overall business risk. Because you need to be able to take security and integrate it as part of that to be able to speak in a language they're going to understand. So to go in and say, oh, we're not patched, we might get compromised, that doesn't honestly mean anything to a COO. Now go in and tell them that if we don't implement this process, here's the likelihood from our customers, and this is what the financial fallout might be. Speak to them in their own language, and all of a sudden you'll notice that the amount of money you get funded changes drastically.
Yeah, you made me think of the city of Atlanta and the steady stream of information that keeps coming from that. And I think, you have to be careful to go along with Chris is saying, how you phrase it, right? And I think that even if you put it in business speak and go, hey, it'd be bad if we lost all the body cam footage from all the police officers in our city, right? Because that could happen. And I think that kind of fear-mongering doesn't necessarily work either. However, that's the situation that Atlanta's in today.
Yeah, but I think you need to kind of balance that so what is the likelihood of that?
Right.
What are the mitigation steps after the fact? Yeah, if you go into it kind of dispassionately, that seems to kind of carry this a long way. Be holistic.
So there's a lot of solutions on the market today, and Chris, you and I talked about some of this yesterday, right? And I mean, we all see it here at Security Weekly when we analyze the market and we say, yeah, okay, what does that vendor do? Well, there's this huge class that says we can take some network traffic, some network logs, some threat intelligence, some telemetry from the endpoints and logging, and we can take all that in. We can do some fancy stuff with it and spit out the other side, like what we think you should care about. And if I had like $1 for every, vendor that says that they can do that, I'd probably be pretty rich, or maybe I'd have $150. But still, that's a lot of companies that say they do the same thing. How does our audience navigate these waters and find the right solution for them?
Well, marketing is easier than engineering, right? It's a whole lot easier to rebrand a product to whatever the latest thing is. And, I don't want to go naming names, or I could. But there are a lot of organizations that started off as we are endpoint security or we are log review, tools that all of a sudden look at what they're offering. It really is no different than it used to be. So, part of it is kind of the marketing aspect of it. I think part of it too is folks need to kind of look at and be realistic about, what can you go after? I mean, John and I have kind of talked about, and Paul, you and I have had this conversation too about all the potential sources we could be pulling data in from. And we don't because, we think just as much about what not to include in the product as we do is actually what features to pull in because of that information overload thing. You don't want to get people to the point where they're just stymied, where they say, okay, I got 30 gigs of log entries yesterday that need review, and I've got a script that's going to sort out, let's say 10 gigs of that, and then that's going to leave me with 20 gigs to go through. Oh my God, how long is that going to take me? When we first started down this path, one of the things John conveyed was that he was going out and, doing threat hunts for organizations, which was basically take 24 hours worth of data off of their network.
Chris's connection keeps cutting in and out.
Oh, sorry about that, guys. So John, who's very good at this, might still take a week or two to go through 24 hours worth of data. I mean, that's horrible because if you think about it, you're never, ever going to actually catch up. So a lot of what we need is just, simplicity to make this go by a whole lot easier.
John, other areas you want to cover in this space?
No, I think that, Chris mentioned something at the beginning, and I think it's important. A lot of the solutions that we're kind of competing against, and I don't want to basically rip on any of our competitors, they're ridiculously expensive. I mean, one of the sales tactics that we use whenever we're talking to people, whenever people start talking about price, is we're less than the sales tax of a lot of those products. And there's a number of reasons why we're going that route, but one of the things I think that's important is that this type of solution, if you decide to move into threat hunting, it does not have to be ridiculously expensive. And then the other part of that, a lot of these products, they have their own SQL query language that you have to learn in order to make the product useful. And we're not at that point either. So we're trying to be an inexpensive, easy to use solution that can be used for this network-based threat hunting. And so far, we've been very successful. I mean, we've been doing a lot of hunts. We've been working with customers that have been doing hunts. And it's been interesting and eye-opening to see what is found and how people go about finding it. But the most important thing is that people are finding it. They are finding strangeness in their network. They're finding advanced backdoors. They're finding weird oddities. They're finding people that are doing all kinds of policy violations. And once again, that doesn't necessarily have to be something super expensive. It doesn't have to be something super complicated. Years ago, back in 2003, I was sitting in Chris Brenton's 502 class, or Track 2, and he came up with this idea of log analysis. And his whole point of log analysis was to take a script, and you basically go through your event logs and you say, I know what that is, 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 and then you filter it. And then the next day you find new things and you filter those things out, and you filter those things out, and you filter those things out. And at the end of the day, what you get are the interesting things, the gray things, the things that you did not expect, the things you did not know. And that's where the interesting stuff is. And what we've done with this on the network side is we've done a tremendous amount of that filtering before the analyst even has to get there to actually bring them the interesting interesting things right up front. So check it out. We've got lots of videos. The website is activecountermeasures.com. We're inexpensive. We're easy to use. We make it accessible for junior analysts, and we're a lot of fun for an advanced analyst to sit down and play with the product as well. So that's my final words. Chris, do you got anything else to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing onto that because you were talking about some of the things that customers have been finding that have been kind of interesting. And I think one of my favorites has been the cameras that we're beaconing, because that adds an interesting spin to this whole thing, because a lot of the solutions that are out there for threat hunting are endpoint based. You know, throw software on your Windows system and we'll tell you if it gets compromised. Well, most environments are made up of more than Samsung refrigerators that might get compromised, hint, hint. We're able to catch that, which I'm sorry, but that's bloody cool. That is bloody cool.
Yeah, and it was really, well, you were talking about the cameras. We detected a bunch of cameras at this one customer that were beaconing back to a number of different IP addresses in China. And then like 2 weeks after that, it hit the news that this particular vendor of camera had malware in it built into the firmware. And it was kind of this eye-opening thing, like, holy crap, we caught that weeks before it actually hit the news. So that's the type of stuff that we're finding that's just making this really exciting for me as an offensive person to make this transition into the defense and getting really super excited again about seeing things that I just haven't seen before.
And what I really like is, you know, it stems from the three of us and the extended team, our experience analyzing networks, right? And, you know, when I go off and I use some other open source tools and I'm like, wow, that's a whole lot of data. Like, I really just want to do basic, like, simple things that we know work, like frequency analysis. Like, and that's, you know, and all the vendors are messaging about this advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I'm like, and there was actually one of our sponsors, Logrunner, and I were just talking about this. Like, I want basics. Like, tell me about the least frequently occurring, most frequently occurring events, and some other things that are, I don't want to say basic math, but math that I can cut in. And once I have that information as the analyst, I know, oh, that's something interesting or not interesting. And I think that we've gotten lost as an industry to say, I want to collect, as Chris was saying, 30 gigs of data. I want to apply this fancy machine learning. But when, you know, the three of us sit down in front of a console, you know, independently, we're like, I want to know this. And I don't need sources of data from 8 million different places in a fancy machine learning algorithm or multiple algorithms to tell me that. Like, I know what I want to see. And that's really what I feel we've built into the product is, you know, just cutting to the chase and giving analysts what they want to see. So it's awesome.
Absolutely.
And then it's how to go through and fool the AI so that it's looking at the wrong thing so I can now sneak through.
Right. Exactly.
At the end of the day,
that's the
it's
BHIS side of the house. So. I love that game, the escalation between the developers at Active Countermeasures and Black Hills Information Security. It drives me insane because no matter what, I lose or I win. I don't know. It all depends on perspective.
No, it's very true. Well, Chris, thank you very much for appearing on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. With that, we're going to take a short break, come back, and talk about the enterprise security news for this week.